On this channel, we talk about all kinds of things related to impact and healing. Sometimes it's just kind of factual, sharing specific types of information. And sometimes we talk about things that are a little harder, a little deeper, maybe even a little more emotional. And today, I think, might be a little bit more of the latter. Welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to talk about something today that has the potential to bring up some sadness, some loss, some grief, because that is ultimately kind of what we're going to be talking about. So if you are not in a place right now where this conversation can feel supportive or helpful, but more on the side of triggering, then maybe this isn't the best time to listen. Or maybe you listen and take a break if you need to and just put it away until another time. Or maybe even helpful, depending on your circumstances, maybe allow yourself to be here with us, with me, to talk about something that is likely going to be impacting you in some way or another, more so at different times than others. But allowing yourself to be here with me in this space, acknowledging and talking about something that can be really hard to talk about, and then being very intentional about doing something that is a healthy distraction. Maybe more specifically, ideally, something that allows you to connect with somebody that you feel a level of support with. It doesn't have to be that you talk about this specifically, though that could be great, but even more so, just to make sure that you're not isolating afterward. And kind of just getting really caught up in any sort of difficult thoughts or experiences that might come to mind. So if that hasn't scared you away, we'll go ahead and get into it. And I say that in kind of a laughing way because I do want you to take it seriously. If you're not in a particularly, or if you are in a particularly bad place, you're feeling already pretty isolated and alone, it's not that you shouldn't listen, but just you know yourself. And if it feels like it's getting too much, then please just pause and come back another time. And try to really connect with somebody, a group of people, whatever it might be, that helps you know that you're not alone. So we do talk about grief and loss in various ways here. And one of the things that I do talk about often is how grief is a necessary part, or allowing yourself to grieve is a necessary part along this healing journey. And that grief can look and even feel different, right? On different days for different reasons, depending on where you are in your healing or what's going on around you. There are a lot of factors that play into all of that. One thing about it is it's never easy. And I think that's one of the reasons why there are so many people who have talked about doing a lot around healing, but feeling that it's not really been helpful. Because allowing ourselves as individuals to really grieve is really difficult to do, even when we have a really helpful professional to help us through that. It can still be quite challenging. And the reality is that there are a lot of professionals who I think sometimes have a lot of difficulty either understanding the reality of grief as a necessary part of healing and the impact of that and how grief shows up. And then some people just aren't comfortable with grief, consciously or otherwise, and that can make it challenging. And I'm not degrading anybody. That's just the reality. We all have areas that we have a little bit more difficulty dealing with. So, today I want to talk about a particular aspect of grief and part of the challenge that it can create. And this actually came up because I took a voice note because I didn't want to forget, but it was something that I heard or saw a little while ago. And I don't remember what the context of it fully was, but I listened to the note, and it was feeling that there was an important thing here to talk about in regards to so much of what grief can be at times. And there's likely going to be a lot more that I could potentially touch on in this video. One, I'm not going to remember it all. Two, it would make this entirely too long. So there's a couple of things in particular that I'm going to talk about, and maybe I will do another video and talk about it a little bit more. But so we talk about grief in terms of grieving the things that you didn't have, right? Like the freedom to experience your life as a child in the way that children should be able to experience their childhood. Grief around betrayal in relationships. Grief around the impact that it's created on your life and what that means, and the things that you didn't do as a result, or things that you did do that you feel maybe some regret or shame around. So lots of different things that we've talked about, but one thing that I haven't really or a specific way that I haven't necessarily talked about it before, is what that grief can actually be around different types of things. And so in my voice note, again, I don't remember the actual thing that I read or saw or whatever, but I talked about how, or what stood out to me was that so often some of the grief that we can touch into is around a wish that was never granted. And in that wish not being granted, it reinforces that we are unworthy of that wish. We're undeserving of that wish. And maybe we're undeserving of that wish because we're responsible for the thing that happened, for the thing that is creating that grief ultimately. And so recognizing that and really thinking about how we reflect on things, and certainly it can be related to childhood trauma, and that's what we're here talking about. But it can also be about relationships. It can be about even things that we missed out on in childhood. But as we reflect back, especially if we're in a particularly difficult place, while we may not consciously say to ourselves, I wish I had been able to experience that, or I wish that hadn't happened, the things that we are saying to ourselves, the ways that we think and remember things, in our heart, there is this sense of a wish. And if you think about children who, like, they throw a coin in the fountain, or they blow out their birthday candles. So maybe not even for you, because this may not have been the case for you, but if you think about a picture perfect life for a child, and they're wishing, and just kind of that thing that may seem completely impossible to have happen, but they approach that wish with everything in them. And sometimes they so desperately want that to happen. And maybe it's, getting a unicorn for their birthday or something. So it doesn't even have to be at all realistic, but they feel it, they allow themselves to really wish it. And even if we don't feel that same sense of energy and freedom to wish for something wonderful, when you are living with trauma or in chaos and dysfunction as a child, there is a part of you that is constantly wishing that it were different, whether you consciously have those thoughts or not. And in that wish, you're putting it out there, you're wanting it to be different. And when that wish is not granted and something bad continues to happen, or you continue to experience really difficult feelings and emotions and have difficult experiences, and it doesn't seem like anything is ever really going to change, that can leave us feeling incredibly defeated, deflated, hopeless. And all of that reinforces those false beliefs. And then as we get older into our early adult life, and certainly beyond that, sometimes we might consciously recognize that we had certain wishes or desires, but oftentimes they're not something that come into our conscious mind all that often. However, those wishes are still living within that wounded part of ourselves, the child part, the part that felt that sense of disappointment and maybe even hurt around that disappointment. Because that wound has never been able to heal yet, that wound is still within that child part of ourselves. That ungranted wish, that ignored wish, that dismissed wish. And as we continue to go through our lives, and we have kind of talked about this a little bit here, but I know it's something that comes up in conversations in my work quite often, but how we don't really allow ourselves sometimes to hope for very much, right? Because we don't want to be disappointed. And some of that comes from, and I would maybe even say possibly quite a lot of that can come from those wishes that we had never being met, never being granted as children. And when I say a wish, I'm not talking about the unicorn for your birthday. I'm talking about very simple things, although that might be part of it too. But I'm talking about to feel safe enough to go to sleep, to have somebody tell you that they love you, that you matter, to feel a sense of freedom and not worrying about when it's going to happen. So, very reasonable wishes that should have been granted, that never should have even been a part of your life. You never should have had to have wished for. So into our adult lives, it creates the sense that those types of things will never happen for you. And the impact that that has on how we allow ourselves to live, how we allow or don't allow ourselves to explore the things that we desire and want to do and the risks we're willing to take. All of that can be wrapped up in that. And one of the things that, or one of the ways I think that this shows up a lot for people is when it comes to thinking about boundaries. And I'm sure that there are a lot of other ways too, but this is just something that really came to mind that I think most people can relate to on some level. Because when it comes to setting boundaries with people that we've had in our life, especially family members or people that maybe were a part of our life during a really difficult time, and maybe they're not the healthiest people for us to be in relationship with. And we can start thinking about setting boundaries around those relationships. And there may be a part of you that is really kind of invested in, like, okay, I know that this is what's best. Even maybe I know that I deserve better, those kinds of things. And there's a lot of things that go into it, into the challenge of boundaries. So it's not just this, but I think that this can play a role. But when we think about setting those boundaries, there's a lot of the different pieces that can come up, right? Guilt, fear, all of that, and that can be really difficult to work through. And I've talked before about how we hope that things will change. And as I thought about this, I thought, it is true that we often do have this hope that things will change. And that is kind of like future focus, like, well, maybe down the road this will change. Maybe this will get better. I think part of what can also be very present is that we continue to hold on to the wish that it had been different. So, for example, if you're thinking about having to set a boundary with a family member, I suppose whether that family member was an abuser or not, I think you can think of it either way, but maybe just the family member that you're needing to set a boundary with, that there's unhealthy aspects to it. They don't, they're not supportive of your healing, or maybe they're emotionally disconnected and not particularly helpful for you to be in relationship with. But especially when it's a parent or somebody that fills that sort of caregiving role, I think there is that wound within that still feels that disappointment and that hurt, and so desperately wishes for something different. And if we end that relationship, if we no longer participated in it in the same way, if that person doesn't want to honor or respect our boundaries, then we lose the opportunity. That wish can never be granted. And I have talked about this before in terms of some of the challenges that come up, but in particular, when you think about what it feels like to wish for something, right? So I'm taking this a little bit deeper in terms of the emotional drive, the emotional impact. When we choose to set a firm boundary and maybe not have any contact with that person any longer, we are giving up on that wish. And again, thinking about a child, so maybe not even yourself. If you can think about yourself and be compassionate and feel a heart connection to that part of yourself, then definitely think of yourself. If you have difficulty with that, I would encourage you to actually think of a child maybe that you know and care about, or just generally a child, and think about this sadness, the loss, just so many potential different difficult emotions that a child would feel to give up, to recognize that that wish will never come true. Something that they so desperately need, not just want, not just a unicorn, but something that they need. It's heartbreaking. And whether we're talking about boundaries or anything else, when it comes to grief around wishes, that is the reality of part of the grief of healing. And again, that grief could be around so many different things, but often there is an aspect of relational stuff that happens there. So I think being able to have an awareness around that, being able to acknowledge that within yourself, I think those things are really important, because with that, you are able to honor the reality of that pain, the significance of that grief, which then allows you to heal, to move through that grief, to be able to navigate through that so that you can set that grief aside and continue moving forward. And just like all grief, if we just don't acknowledge it, or we are intentional about trying to ignore it, we can't really put it aside. It's still right there with us. We may be able to ignore it for periods of time, but it is still traveling right there with us. When we allow ourselves to recognize and to acknowledge and to honor and to grieve, we are then able to actually take that grief and set it aside. And maybe even more so, it's not even so much that we have this big thing of grief that we need to set aside. It's that as we move through that, as we honor, as we heal, that grief begins to kind of disintegrate in a sense. So it's not even so much that we have to put it to the side, it's that it kind of just melts away in a sense. And that's not to say that we will never feel that grief. It's not to say that we will never feel the sadness. We just won't be carrying it in the way that we do when we haven't been able to acknowledge and or heal. And when I talk about honoring, and this is true, I think, anytime that I talk about honoring, but in particular with this issue, with this type of experience, honoring is really important because we are able to go back to that child that wished, that child that is still within us, and even the adult that is here today, that are part of, at least, even if not really consciously, wishes had been different or wishes could be different. When we honor that reality, we are meeting it from a place of being able to hold that. The pain, the discomfort, the frustration, the sadness, all of that, we're able to hold that instead of just pushing it away. And remember, when we push those types of things away, difficult feelings, things that feel bad, or even experiences that feel bad, when we just push it away, we actually can give it more energy because it takes energy to keep it pushed away, right? So in the honoring, in the acknowledgement, we are creating space so that we can move through it. And as we move through, it disintegrates. And I would say that that's pretty true around most things related to healing. So, again, if you're in a space where you can do this, in terms of like, what do you do with this now? The acknowledgement, recognizing what is there. If you are working with a therapist, definitely this is something to bring to your therapist and talk through with your therapist. And this is something that you might talk about many different times. And in the very short term, you could even maybe after this video sit down and just first maybe write whatever came to mind for you, feelings, experiences, memories, emotions, fears, whatever it is. Just let yourself write whatever feels present for you. And then maybe take a little bit of time. It doesn't have to be immediately, but over a couple different days or something. Maybe sit down and write, whether it's things that you remember wishing as a child, or you have no memory even in your adult life of wishing for something to be different. But just imagine, with everything that you know now, what might you have wished for as a child, and what might that be now? And again, hopefully you're working with somebody and you can process this with them, because this really can be something that brings up a lot of not only emotion but memories. Maybe memories that you've had, and you're very clear about, but there's a good chance that this might connect you more to the emotion behind some of those memories. And that's sometimes where, when we bring those things together, that is often where things can feel pretty difficult. So I hope that this felt helpful to you. If you have found that you've struggled like getting over or getting past certain things, grief generally, or maybe even more specifically what we've talked about today, may be a part of that. Because when we have things that continue to replay over and over again, whether it's an emotion or a memory or a belief, there's often going to be some idea and or experience that we're holding on to, that our mind keeps taking us back to, that reinforces that. So I hope that this is helpful for you. Take care of yourself. So some healthy distraction, connection is going to be really, really important. It's always important, but especially when you're feeling kind of vulnerable, and grief can bring up a lot. So try to be really mindful of taking care of yourself, both emotionally and physically. I would love to hear from you. What came up? Share in the comments. Thanks so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time.